And I invite you to bring to mind a resource that makes you feel calm and good inside. And just focus on this resource. Does it have a sound or a smell or a taste? How does it feel to touch it? And as you're thinking of this resource, just notice any changes in your posture, in your expressions on your face, any changes in your body's tension, and how your breath might change. And let's just take a breath, maybe two more, and then one more. I invite you to open your eyes and release this practice. So let's define trauma. Trauma is defined as a nervous system response to a real or perceived threat to physical or emotional well-being. So it's not just an event that's happened, but it's the reaction of the body. And so our understanding of ourselves and others and the world often changes because our sense of trust is impacted, our vulnerability, our powerlessness, it's all impacted. And for children, there's an invisible suitcase that happens when they experience trauma. It shapes their beliefs and their expectations about themselves, about the adults who will care for them, about the world in general. So what's in this suitcase? No one loves me. It's all my fault. You're going to leave me. Nobody is there. Grown-ups lie, and I am bad. So what are the child factors that are impacting trauma for a child? There are child factors and there's contextual factors. So the age of a child is actually really important because of their level of brain development and the stage of dependency. We often think that if they're very little, they'll just forget about it, except that the body remembers experiences. And even if there isn't language yet, it is in the body, our stress responses. The constitution of the child, like what was their in utero experience? Was there drug exposure? What's the genetics, the temperament? And what is the child's skills and abilities at the time? If you are a baby, you have a lot less capability than if you're a 5 or 6-year-old to understand what's happening to you and to move. And if you've had previous trauma, you are more vulnerable because you have this experience built in your nervous system that has more fear. So what contextual factors determine the impact of trauma on a child? How frequent was the trauma? How long did it last? And the nature of the trauma? Like, for example, sexual abuse would be much more impactful because it was something with someone, if the abuser was someone you know, the level of invasiveness, the degree of violence. And I think systemic issues really impact trauma too, because there's so much more strain if you're dealing with discrimination based on any of the isms, your race, your class, your gender, your sexual orientation, all of these things without, you have more strain because you have more stress, because you don't feel as safe. And what meanings you attach to what has happened to you, like, is it my fault? And whether you are validated or not believed if you share that something has happened. So what contextual factors determine the impact of trauma on the child? Well, the responsiveness of the caregiver is really important, and the care that's received right after the event and the support contextually of the people in the child's life, the teachers, the family and friends, because if there's a shared understanding about what may have happened, there's often more compassion and there's more understanding, and so there's more responsiveness. So when we think of the nervous system, there is arousal of energy going up and down all day long. And our body has in the autonomic system kind of like an accelerator and a brake. And so as we have stresses throughout the day, the accelerator might speed us up and then our brake would slow us down. And that's like a normal flow that happens for everyone. And when you're a young child, you're very dependent on the care of your caregivers. So when you feel more out of sorts, if you can have responsiveness enough of the time, not perfection, you're going to have a nervous system that's resilient because you've been able to have what's called co-regulation, where someone else is helping you when you get distressed. So you learn how to manage more on your own. So we're learning by experience. So say you decide you're going to go for a hike in the woods. It's beautiful in the Bay Area and the air is fresh and it's not a cold day and the sun is out. And then you see a snake on your path. It's really quite terrifying. And there's a little rattler, like it's not what you were bargaining for. And so your brain will release chemicals that help your body to respond to this potential threat. So that will lead you to fight, flight, or freeze, which is your stress response. And if the threat is removed, everything will go back to normal and you will continue on if you have a resilient nervous system. But say the threat is continued and it's repeated and there isn't that other person that provides enough support to regulate your emotions, the system will stay on red alert. And even when there's no threat, you will feel activated as if there was one. And so if you live that way as a child repeatedly and you're not getting enough support, you don't have that nice wave of brake and gas, brake and gas. It's kind of like you're revved. So you're either really revved up or you're really slowed down or you're going up and down really fast. So you see that manifest behaviorally and emotionally. So you might see a child experience more anxiety, more outbursts if they're revved up. Or you might see them be more sad and exhausted and have fatigue if they're more flat. So, as I said before, we learn by experience. So you go for a hike another day, and even though you have those intentions to have another great day, the sun is out, it's not too cold, and you are walking along and you see this stick on the side, you had the experience before of there being a snake in the grass nearby. So your body remembers that there was that snake from before, and you rev up as if there is danger. But the truth is, there isn't danger. So we are learning all the time by our experiences, and that's setting our responses. So with trauma, memory is a big part of why we have continued reactivity. So if we define memory as the capacity to bring elements of an experience from one moment in time to another moment in time, we're saying that's what memory is. There's two different kinds for humans. There's the explicit kind, which is the kind we think of when we remember, oh, I went to the beach and I had a Coca-Cola and I was there with my friends, right? There's a felt sense of remembering that something happened in the past. You feel that you're remembering it, and it has knowledge and there's facts, and you can have a moment in time. You remember this happened. Implicit memory, there is no conscious remembering, and that is more in the body. So we have feelings, we have sensations, we have perceptions, we have behavioral impulses, and we're not conscious of that. So when we have a traumatic event, trauma is disrupting how memories get processed, because the part of the brain that works with memory consolidation is called the hippocampus, and that connects those feelings, sensations, and all of that from the implicit part of memory to the explicit, where you remember. So during a traumatic experience, the hippocampus shuts off. So the brain is only focusing on survival, not on memories being organized. So what happens is you have all of these sensations and impulses and perceptions, but they're not connected to the facts because the hippocampus is offline. So when that's happening, that means that that's all stored in your body. So when something else happens in the here and now that makes you feel some of those sensations, it's not connected to, oh, this was the past. You feel like that is happening now. And that is a trauma trigger. So if you have a child who is having a sensation reminder, let's say this child was harmed by someone who had a certain deodorant, for example. And so they know that smell and they connect that smell with someone who's harmful to them. And they go to school and then they have a teacher's aide who wears the same deodorant. The teacher's aide is a perfectly nice person, but the child has a strong, fearful reaction, and you get more tantrums, you get more defiance, and people don't understand because it seems to be coming out of nowhere. And the reason why it's coming out of nowhere is the child has no intentional recall. It doesn't have to be about the context in the moment, but the sensation in the bodies of this child's body is there about this smell connects me with danger happening to me. And so the body is ready for survive and fight back. And so the child's trying to be safe in the best way the child knows how. And so this is true for adults as well. So we have different ways that manifests. You can have flashbacks, you can have nightmares, you can have challenging behaviors, tantrums. And it's part of that disconnect of what happened not being connected to a storyline. So when we see our kids as doing the best they can in the moment and having a reaction that makes perfect sense based on what's happening in their neurobiology, we can stay more regulated. Our kids relate to themselves differently. We respond with more compassion, empathy, and boundaries versus thinking, oh, they're bad, they're not listening. Like to just think about, okay, something's making him or them feel unsafe. And how can I support a greater sense of safety for them and for myself? And if you have understanding about this material, that might occur to you. So the effects of trauma. Exposure to trauma causes the brain to develop in a way that will help the child survive in a dangerous world. They'll be on constant alert for danger, and they're quick to react to threats with a stress response. But this becomes less helpful for day-to-day living. So I want to talk about some of that neurobiology. This is a slide showing our neurons over time. So if you follow the slide from left to right, when we're born, our neurons aren't super connected, but we are what's called experience dependent. So what we have happen in relationships in our early years sets how our brain is actually being developed and the neurons connecting with each other. And so if you look at a 2-year-old slide, which is on the second to last, and then the adult slide, which is the last, those slides look very similar. And that's to say, so much brain development's happening in those first years of life. And those experiences that children have with their caregivers is taking in the whole experience, what their sensations felt, what their feelings were, what the memories of interactions were. It's all getting wired into their physiology. And so our brains are developing from the bottom to the top. When we are in the utero, our brainstem is getting developed so that when we come out to the world, our brain is already ready to regulate our breathing and our heart rate. And so like our basic functioning is set by our brainstem. But how our brain develops has very much to do with how we are in relationship to our caregivers. And we have what's called core regulatory networks, which are the systems in our brain that start developing in the womb that originate from our brainstem, and they extend throughout our entire brain. And they help us to stay regulated. And that's kind of like our neuroimmune system, our stress response, our endocrine system. All of these systems are wired through these core networks, and they're influencing our bodies and our thoughts and our feelings. So if a child is experiencing unpredictable or extreme or prolonged stress, they have more risk because those systems are getting wired in very early and they're building networks for reactivity. Can a heightened sense of fear be inherited? Yes. Genes transmit information to the next generation. Some part of a stress response can be inherited, like a child could be born with a sensitive stress response. They might be more overwhelmed by something minor because it wasn't just their lived experience, it's also their genetics. And then heritable epigenetics. Epigenetics is the study of how behaviors and environment can adapt to activate or silence gene expression. And epi is Greek for above. So epigenetics are the mechanisms above the gene that are switching the genes off and on, like a light switch. So epigenetic changes influence those same networks that I mentioned in the last slide, and they can be stored in the egg or sperm and influence the next generation. So I want to pause here and say that co-regulation is the physiological platform for safety. It's how we are in relationship that supports our sense of security and engagement. And the brain is developing from bottom to top. So when we are born, we have our brainstem online that is ready to go for our survival. But to be more and more the humans that we care about, that is coming from the regulation we're getting from our caregivers, the back and forth of those interactions. And those repeated interactions help us wire a brain that is able to be more connected and help us to be thinkers and pausers and reflectors. But that has a lot to do with how the interactions are happening. So how does this apply to a child who has witnessed interpersonal violence? If a young child grows up witnessing domestic violence, they saw their father belittle and hit their mother, and there was no one to support them with the distress, they will, generally speaking, be more vulnerable to stress based on repeated experiences of being afraid and more reactive as their lens will be heightened for survival. And those implicit memory sensations, associations are that men are scary, for example, or men that look like my dad are very scary, or loud masculine voices mean bad things will happen. And these are connections that then set off those cascades of stress response when it may not be that they actually are unsafe because of that disconnect between the way memories get stored in traumatic experience. A child goes to school, there's a teacher that looks like his dad. The child's not aware of this cue because it's stored in implicit memory and there's not a sense of recall. The teacher comes over to provide learning assistance. His brain matches the stimuli of the teacher's appearance and sound to that of his father, and the brainstem response is to protect himself from danger, and he has an out-of-the-blue outburst. The child might regularly shut down and have outbursts and have difficulty managing transitions, following rules, being in relationships, and potentially be expelled from preschool. So how is a child or any of us determining that we're safe? It's through a mechanism that's called neuroception. Our nervous systems are remarkable. They are evaluating risk without our awareness by reading cues of safety and danger all the time, inside us, outside us, and between us. Inside us, we're tracking if we feel pain or hunger or cold, things like those kinds of sensations to let us know we're not okay. Like if I cut my finger, oh, it's bleeding, I can feel the pain. Outside environment, like what's happening in the noises around me, for example, is often a way we know that we have danger. And between people, like the tone of voice, the quality of gestures, like whether someone seems like they're angry or if they feel very welcoming, the apparent feelings of the other person, we're picking up on that. So this is all very different than perception, which is using thinking. This is not thinking. This is automatically happening. There's billions of pieces of information going through, being processed by our body from our organs, from our senses. and our brain is determining what to do, not consciously about whether based on whether we feel safe or not. But if you're a traumatized child, you have faulty neuroception. Um, the perception of safety that we have promotes social engagement, the back and forth behavior that we want to see, taking turns, choosing to play, playing nice, sharing, cooperating, perspective taking, having empathy. But the perception of danger promotes more defensive things like the fight, flight, freeze. And what children need from caregivers is nurture and messages of safety in the relationship. So that social engagement is happening a lot through our eyes, our tone of voice, how we gaze, um, our head turn and tilt. These are all the ways that we are doing this, determining if we're safe. A lot of it's nonverbal. I was going to show this video, but I had a little technical difficulty, so I'm not going to show it. But in this video, it's a still face video. The mom and baby will interact, and then the researcher asked the mom to turn away. And what happens is the baby then becomes frantic, trying to get the mom's attention. And he'll go, "Eh," and he'll try and wave and kick and do all the skills that he has at his disposal to try and get mom to come back into connection, because it's so needed. We need connection. And when we don't have it, we flip into protection mode, where we do more aggressive things or we shut down, for example. And this baby and mom have a good relationship. And so mom, when she was directed to return to the baby then would settle. And so the goal in showing the video would have been to show you how in 2 minutes of interaction, there's so much exchanged in our relatedness about whether we are feeling seen, whether we're feeling understood and safe. So there's a range of stress. Stress sometimes gets a bad rap, but we need stress to learn and grow and develop. So positive stress would be things like, okay, I'm on a baseball team and I'm up at bat and it's scary, but it's short-lived, and whatever happens, I have a team that's there to support me. That's short-lived, and it just does mild elevations in your stress hormone. Tolerable stress is something more serious. There's temporary stress responses, and it's buffered by supportive relationships. So like, say you get in a car accident, that's more serious, but you have a loving family and you calm from this and you get through it. The stress that's most impactful is toxic stress. And that's when that stress response that I showed earlier with the snake and the staying on, it leaves us tired because we are not wired to constantly be on for a stress response. We are wired to have a response to help us survive and then go back into normal homeostasis, like our balance. But if we don't have enough support in protection, because you could be supportive, but you need protection so you're not unsafe, and you staying in this way, it's much more taxing for a nervous system. And for a young child in particular, it's much more taxing because they're dependent and they don't have as much control. So I just wanted to highlight the impact of abuse and neglect on the brain. This is actually a child who was a Romanian orphan. And so on your right is the child who is the orphan, and on your left is a child who is got a healthy brain. And I just thought it'd be helpful just to make this application be clearer about how our experiences impact, how repeated engagement helps or doesn't help. So if you would, looking at these two brains side by side, can you find, what do you find? Give me 3 differences. What do you find? Can either someone unmute, or if Jessica, if you can see chat, because I can't see chat. What are three things that you're noticing that's different between the child with the abused brain and the child with the healthy brain?
So in the chat, Karen said underdeveloped.
Yes. Yes, it's less developed because there aren't interactions happening, right? So there's not wiring, like we're experience dependent, right? So if we don't have the interactions happening, then we aren't having we're not making those neural connections.
Also less active on the abuse side, and the activity level is different.
Yes. So like if you look on the top part of the picture, that's like the front of your brain, which is the prefrontal cortex. It's kind of like your boss of your brain. It's where you do all your great thinking. So the child on the left is very active, which shows us that this child is got a lot of cognitive activity happening. They're thinking about things. They're alert. Whereas the child on the right, it's not very active, which indicates kind of more probably flatness, not as much clear thinking, not as much capacity for reasoning or planning. Anything else?
Let's see. Absence of stimulation.
Yes, the absence of stimulation is creating some of what we see in terms of the gaps. But I want to highlight also that that shows like the lack of like relatedness that didn't help the brain to develop. But if you look on the bottom half of the picture, on the left and the right, on the right, the brain stem on the bottom is much more red, which meant kind of like there was a lot more fearfulness and not enough support, whereas the child on the left, that's smaller. So it just indicates that there was more support with the stress, and that if you have repeated engagement, you can create experiences that help with literally how brains develop. So that's part of where the hope is with all of this. Neuroplasticity is the capacity for your brain, body, and nervous system to change, grow, and heal. We cannot get rid of painful associations of the past. They're there. But the hope is that we can recognize patterns and through repetition, build new associations that can become new and healthier default pathways. The most powerful way to transform past relational pain is through belonging in relationships that are intentional, responsive, and nurturing. Young children need support from safe adults to heal. So you may have heard the term ACEs, and that's an acronym for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And these are potentially traumatic events that occur in childhood between birth and 17 years of age. And they can be direct experiences or experiences within the environment that make the child feel less safe. So this this term and this study of the adverse childhood experiences came about because Vincent Felitti, he was a doctor at Kaiser, I believe in San Diego. He ran an obesity clinic, and he observed that some of his most successful weight loss participants would kind of relapse and put on their weight. And he was very curious about this and very curious about why this would be. So he developed a questionnaire to just ask a little bit about them. And it turned out a lot of people had sex abuse histories in their childhood. And then he thought, wow, their experiences in their childhood were affecting them today, like in their mid 50s. And he approached the CDC, Center for Disease Prevention, and said, I think we need to do a public health study. So they did this huge study with like 17,000 members from Kaiser, and they were mostly white and middle class. They had insurance, and they asked about 10 potential adverse childhood experiences. So there was the abuse, physical, emotional, sexual, and neglect, physical and emotional. and household challenges, the context ones, a parent with mental illness, intimate partner violence, parental separation or divorce, incarceration, substance misuse, or dependence. And that what they found is that most people had at least one ACE. And if there were 4 or more ACEs, that the participants were more likely to have exposure to the more common forms of illness and death, heart disease, etc., than others. So there seemed to be a correlation. It wasn't causation because always there's mitigating things for people. They might actually have other supports happen. So even though they had a lot of ACEs, they may have other supports that happen later, or they might have a temperament that has more resilience, or they might have more options, more resources. There's a lot of things that influence whether someone is going to have more vulnerability or not. But what we, at that time, that was like kind of like their best thing they could do. But that sample was mostly white people, and it didn't take into account structural racism and discrimination and how much that impacts people's stress. And so there has subsequently been lots of research, and they have found different kinds of screening tools. And there's one called the Pearls, and it takes the same ACEs and it adds some other things to ask about. So there's related life events that aren't necessarily all on the ACEs. So they might ask, are you a victim of violence in other ways, like bullying and war and terrorism, discrimination? That's a big one. Race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, your learning differences or your disabilities. That's a source of constant stress. Do you have enough stable housing? And often if you don't have stable housing, you don't have enough food. And if there's attachment disruptions like foster care, or because of immigration, there's separations in families. If you have a parent who has an illness or a disability, so it's not just that they have a mental illness, maybe they have a disability that makes it more stressful in your home. And if there's attachment loss, if a parent died. So they added these in, and there's been, it's kind of a more comprehensive way now, I think, to assess stressors in young children. The dose response relation. Oh yeah, I forgot to say this earlier. As the number of ACEs increases, so does the risk for negative outcomes. And the reasoning behind that is this toxic stress is more taxing to your body. Like if you're constantly having the stress response go off, all those networks all through your system, it's putting more pressure on your organs, on your heart, on your immune system. And so that makes you more vulnerable. It makes you more vulnerable to illness of all kinds, physical kinds, mental illness, more needing to soothe, and you might do that through substances. And it affects a child's capacity to learn because there's too much to manage. But I want to say, like, the ACEs should be looked at in context, and I want to credit Chandra Ghosh-Ipin and Marquita Mays. This is from the Child Trauma Research Project. This content is their slide. That with ACEs, we're looking at just the family unit and what's happening within relationships. And I mean, my message today is so much about co-regulation, but the context that we live in matters. And if we go from left to right, the historical trauma, forced sacrifice of people of color have had a lot of violence. There was genocide of Native Americans, removal of property, colonization, slavery, forced family separation. All of this is the history of our country. And those systemic choices created patterns and structures where we have current systemic oppression. There's more violence in African American neighborhoods. There's more mass incarceration. There's more inequities in preschool suspension. There's inequities in which children are in child welfare. There's inequities in pay and access to housing and transportation. And there's still segregation. So even though officially segregation is not part of our code, the way our neighborhoods got laid out, the way public transit's laid out, it still engenders segregation. And so you put all of this people in this whole context, when you think about it, that's so much pressure on families. and families of color especially. It's much more strained to live with, and it's constant. And so it puts pressure on caregivers, which affects their capacities to manage their own health and take care of themselves and take care of the kids. And you might see more conflicts because of all of the strain. So I want to do a pause here, and let's do some support for our nervous system. I invite you to close your eyes if you feel comfortable to do that. Place a hand on your heart and a hand on your belly, just under your rib cage. And let's do 3 rounds of soothing breath cycles. And I invite you to do a longer exhale because that calms our system more. So like I inhale for a count of 4 and I exhale for a count of 8, but whatever sequence works for you. I'll do 3 and I'll count for us. Let's inhale and exhale. That's 1. Let's inhale and exhale. 2. And last one, let's inhale and exhale. And when you're ready, gently open your eyes and release this practice. In families, we see relational patterns of violence repeat. And how does this happen? If a parent has a past experience, it creates a working model of being in relationship. And it creates expectations of a child based on what was expected of them. And so they selectively attune to these expectations. The child internalizes how to behave based on how the parent responds and behaves accordingly. So I'll give you an example from my clinical experience. So this case is Sammy. Sammy is 5 years old, and she is diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Both parents have histories of domestic violence with other partners, and they're teen siblings who have witnessed physical violence from previous partner relationships, and they live in the home. Sammy has never actually witnessed violence between her parents, but regularly there's arguing and tension between them and between the parents and the older siblings. The child is in 2 school settings, and at aftercare, she does not display any aggression. So what this means is she's in care or school 8 to 9 hours a day, 5 days a week, and there's no aggression. But in the home setting, she engages and she plays with aggression. So how do we understand this? So what I observed, this was a home visiting case. What I observed is that each parent had a different strength and weakness when it came to managing their history and their affect. So in mom's case, she was kind of more tough, and this kid would never say anything disrespectful to her. But and in dad's case, dad couldn't stand up for himself when when the child would say something disrespectful, but he would never allow a physical impacting thing to happen to his body. He would set a limit. So he would have set limits on the physical, but not the verbal. Mom would set limits on the verbal, but not the physical. So one day I'm at their home and the child was playing with her sister, and I was catching up about how their weekend was. I had just gotten there, and mom was explaining to me, what their weekend was like. And it took a little longer. And the child came over to us, and she went and she slammed into her mother's chest, and her mother did nothing. And the father kept sitting there on the bean bag and telling about the weekend. So I'm like, is this okay with you? And they're like, oh, she just plays rough. She's got special needs. She plays rough. So I said, well, she has special needs, but she is in school and aftercare, and she's out many hours of the week, and she's not displaying any aggression. But she's displaying it here because it's what is being allowed. And I said to Mom, I think that you got triggered by her doing something invasive to your body, and you froze. And so you didn't set a limit. So the question is, do you want Dad to set the limit, or do you want support to set the limit? And so she's like, well, I want to set the limit. So I'm like, all right, so then Dad is going to have to support you because I'm only here once a week. And with Dad, Mom would be very derogatory to Dad. So the child copied Mom. So I said, well, Mom, if you want your daughter to be respectful to others in the community, you're going to have to talk differently to Dad because she's copying what you do. And I'm like, I know that right now, none of these behaviors are showing up at school, but eventually they're going to show up at school because they'll become her way of being. So you have an opportunity right now to shift how you guys are setting limits and how you are interacting with each other. So over time, that did shift, and they were more of a collaborative couple, and the aggression went down. But I want to go back and just look at what I said about how trauma would repeat. The parents each had experiences of trauma. In Dad's case, he wasn't able to stand up for himself for verbal abuse. In Mom's case, she wasn't able to stand up for herself for physical abuse. And so they each allowed different things from their child, and the child learned to behave that way. And so even though she didn't officially experience domestic violence between her parents, she was still growing up to be violent without intervention, without parents being helped to see their patterns and shift them. Babies are also affected by conflict. It's often believed that babies won't remember, they don't know. But what we covered today was we have implicit memory, we have sensation memory, we have feeling memory, we have behavioral impulsive memory. And babies can't get up and run away, but they can cry, they can, flail. So there was a study done many years ago by Graham, Fisher, and Pfeiffer with 6 to 12-month-old sleeping babies to assess how they process the human voice. And some of the babies were from homes with domestic violence, and others weren't. And so while the babies were asleep at their normal bedtimes, they were put in an fMRI machine, which allows you basically to take pictures of the brain and see things at the time that they're happening. And there was a male voice making nonsense sentences, but with different tones. So there was neutral, happy, angry, and very angry. And what the fMRI study showed was that all babies processed emotional speech during sleep. So babies from homes with higher interparental conflict were more sensitive to very angry speech. The tones that were very angry, they had more light up in the fMRI. So even when you're sleeping, you're affected. Because that's the other thing. People will say, oh, they were asleep. You can still be affected. So how do we know when babies are affected by trauma? How do we see it? If you bring back to mind the graph about, window of tolerance, and then if it's hyper-aroused or hypo-aroused, in a baby, hyper-arousal shows up as very frequent fussiness, inconsolable crying, difficulty being soothed, heightened startle response, arching of the back, difficulty settling into the caregiver, difficulties with sleeping and eating, and rigid, stiff muscle tone. Hypoarousal in a baby shows up as being shut down, looking vacant. They may sleep excessively. They might have limited movement and be floppy. They might be consistently averting their gaze. They might be less responsive to interaction. and they don't signal the caregiver. They may not cry much. And then how does it look in young kids? They may react to trauma reminders, things, events, situations, sensations, people that the child connects with traumatic events. Like a lot of times sirens are a big trigger for people, police cars. Increase in emotional instability, moody, sad, angry. Age inappropriate behaviors, reacting like a younger child. Difficulty sleeping and eating. Somatic complaints. Sometimes it's not a behavioral problem, but the child will have headaches and stomach aches, fevers, but they really actually aren't sick. Hyperarousal looks like sensitivity to noise and other sensory input. Agitation, hyperactivity, confusion about what's dangerous and who to go to for protection. Behavioral concerns, hitting, biting, running away, tantrums. And then hypoarousal, being withdrawn, reserved, avoiding contact, flat or fearful expression, under-responsive to caregivers' interaction, social withdrawal, they don't want to engage in play. So what do we do? How do we help? Well, it isn't what is probably what comes more naturally. You know, people will tell people what to do. They'll give them the rules and timeouts and consequences. They have to learn. Like all that stuff is not the ideal first go-to. The ideal first go-to is to help calm their nervous system. And I know sometimes that's real tough for parents or caregivers because they feel like it's rewarding bad behavior. Like there's a lot of that kind of belief system out there. But what we learned today was how sensitive our nervous systems are and how sometimes kids don't even know why they are reacting the way they're acting. There is a disconnect between kind of our implicit experience of feelings and sensations and impulses and our memory of things that we consciously recall because the hippocampus shuts off during trauma. So what is needed first is to calm down that stress response. And that might be sensory. It might be blowing bubbles, Play-Doh, walking, bouncing balls back and forth, and doing something to help calm the system. And then you're relating to find out what's happening. And then you're supporting reason. And they're going to be able to hear you better if they're nervous, if their brain is not going bong, bong, bong. Like you want them to get here, but it matters how you do the interactions so that they can be able to hear you and understand what they need to do differently. So key strategies to help children feel safe and manage overwhelming emotions are physical proximity to the child, a gentle tone of voice, offering verbiage that assures safety, an empathic approach to problematic behavior, sensory interventions, hard gum, Play-Doh, movement, playing catch, jumping on trampolines. These are different ways that could support children to feel safer. So I'm going to give you some more case examples. So Roy was a child that was also 5-year-old, but it was a boy, and he lived with his maternal grandmother, who was his legal guardian, and he witnessed and was physically harmed and had scars from the domestic violence between his parents when he was a toddler. And whenever he was triggered by a fear of abandonment, Roy would try to harm me, and he would throw chairs, he would kick, he would punch, and he'd scream loudly. So what I would try to do is stay calm. Grandmother would often hold him because he felt safe with grandmother, as I told him at the end of a therapy session was coming, and gently reassured him that I would see him next week. And we realized pretty quickly that not much was going to be happening in therapy because he was too dysregulated and too destructive. And he had a lot of arousal energy, you know, that fight response. And so that trigger of abandonment, like I am not abandoning him, I will be there the following week. but it's that same concept from earlier, like that trigger reminds him of that experience of being left from parents that did not support him, that did not take care of him. And so it becomes so intense for him because even though it's not what's actually happening, he's responding from the fears that he had from being abandoned so often as a young toddler or being afraid. So I get all the aggression. So we made a choice for a while to go out into the parking lot and throw a football or a frisbee back and forth to help him calm down. And that would help him to get that arousal energy out, but stay in relationship because we were doing back and forth. And he was a really good athlete, and I'm a terrible athlete. Like I can't catch, I can't throw. So it also gave him an opportunity to teach me. And so like he was better at everything. He was better at throwing a football, a frisbee, kicking, whatever. But we did this back and forth, and then he would settle. And I would let him know that we had to end for today, but we had some of that dispersal of that level of arousal, but we still stayed in relationship. But even so, sometimes he would be walking to the car and then he would activate up again, because it was still not feeling safe. It takes so much work to feel safe after so many impactful experiences. And I would again reassure him, but it didn't, he would hate himself. And so like they would be driving home and she would be 20 minutes, grandma would be 20 minutes from the office, and she would have to call so I could reassure him, no, I don't hate him, because he'd calmed down by then. His nervous system had calmed down. No, I don't hate him. Yes, you'll be back next week. Yes, I know that it's hard to manage and we're learning how to manage our impulses. And so we did work to help him to feel safer. And it helped grandma too, because then she's an older caregiver and you've got this kid who can be a real bronco. So like helping her to understand that he needs help to feel safer and do things like this was supportive. And she had strategies that were more physical because she's certainly relational, but like it's frightening, right? And then the flight response. This is case of William. William was also 5 years old, and he was reunifying with his mother after a long period of separation due to her substance use. He was exposed to domestic violence in utero and in his first year of life before he was separated from his mother. He was a flight risk from the playroom. On our first day, I work 410s, and I set this session up to be near the end of the day after having learned about what Roy was like and all the mess and noise in the place. I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen here, but let's do this at the end of the day because there'll be less people, there's less stimuli. Well, talk about triggers. They show up. Mom is really anxious. She shows up and says, I need to use the bathroom. So I turn my head to point down the hall, and he took off running. So he was triggered also by abandonment. The fact that his mother had to pee was too much for him on that first day. And he took off running out of the building. It was dark. And our old office was not too far from the ramp for 680. So I was terrified that what is going to happen to this child. We did find him. And thankfully, it was his mother who found him. And you know where he went? There was these cats that he saw on the drive-in, because when they came in, the sun was going down, but he saw the cats. And the cats were all together near a box on the road. And he said, I went to see the cats because they didn't have their mommy. And, they might need some help. And I just thought it was so powerful because that is his wound. And he did have his mommy there, but he was running away to take care of cats. So we had to do a lot of work initially just to keep him in the building. And that's why our occupational therapist gave me one of those little mini rebounder trampolines, so he could, if he needs to run, he can run in place. And we used hard chewing gum as a way to organize him, and he had to choose when he wanted what, because he can't chew gum and jump on the trampoline. And so it got to a point where he would say, Roxanne, I need my gum. Like he started to learn what he needed. And we had to work with mom because, she had to learn to cue him. So like when she first came, she was just feeling bad about herself and hadn't been with him. And, what am I going to say about her? Like there was no trust yet. But then she learned if she had to use the bathroom to make eye contact, to get down to his level and say, I need to use the bathroom. Do you want to come with me to the bathroom or do you want to wait here? So that he would not have the trigger of you're leaving me. Because what she used to do when she was using is she would leave him by himself as a toddler in his crib and take off to, and she would take off to go and use. And so he would be by himself and cold and no one would be there. And so it took a lot of work. And I was blessed that this mom was very motivated and very creative. So like she was able to roll with it and do this work. And so we did a lot more physically based things as well. Like I had a big exercise ball and they would actually roll on that and do things together because that's what he could tolerate. And he would often try and hide under the tables and stuff. And I would like, you don't have to yell at him. It's okay. He's trying to feel safe. I'm here with you. He'll come out. And so like we had to practice like doing some of that regulation. And in time, he was able to tell her, you weren't there for me. And she explained, well, I thought I was keeping you safe, but I didn't understand at the time. And so like there was a repair that happened. This was the same kid I just said, the freeze stuff. So how to think about how you would intervene. Like what's lying beneath a child's behavior? Like, do they have a trauma history? And what do they need to feel safe? What do they need from you? That co-regulation. What is the child's developmental stage, right? Is it normal to have a tantrum? Or is this like they're 5 and they shouldn't be having tantrums? What's their current state? Are they in fight, flight, freeze? And how is their problem behavior their solution to creating safety? So in the 2 children that I mentioned, the Roy who would kick and hit, when he was harmed in domestic violence, he was sitting in a car seat and the parents would fight and then he got knocked over. So what is his natural body response? He wants to fight. He wants to get out. And then for William, he was in a crib. He couldn't run away. So his natural response is to choose running away. And so kids vary based on what their circumstances were at the time of trauma, but what they might be attracted to do. So let's just think for a moment what we can pull together. If you have a 5-year-old with his mom and siblings in a waiting room and they're waiting and the clinician's running late and they were there to talk about a family violence episode that happened the day before, the child is yelling loudly, hitting his 3-year-old sister and refusing to share. He screams no to everything the mother says. What do you think's happening for this child if you're thinking about it in terms of trauma? And what might help him and help the mom in the moment? Like what would be helpful? You can either unmute or put it in the chat. And Jessica, I can't see the chat, so if you'd let me know. What might support?
Hi there, this is Julie.
Hi, Julie.
I'm struggling with ideas because I would be inclined to use the mom, but he seems to be responding negatively to her, so that doesn't seem like a good idea. So I'm struggling with this one.
Well, and it is a tough situation because you're also in a waiting room. And
Yes.
so it's also public, right? You're not like in a therapy room or at their house where it's just them. So it is a hard situation. And sometimes uh there isn't a miracle answer, but there's like you do trial and error. And so some things that we might do, depending on whether you feel this child is going to be a runner or not, is say, why don't we go for a walk around the block, right? Just because there's movement and there's regulation that's coming from nature. Um, and it gives a way to breathe. Having pinwheels, because pinwheels, you can see the effect of your breath, when you blow. Um, but definitely going over to him and saying something like, I see your body's moving really fast, and we need to be safe with our hands and our voices. And so then you offer an option, right? Like maybe Play-Doh, something that's sensory often is more calming. Bubbles, Play-Doh, pinwheel, movement. These are things that are more regulating in terms of the quick response to calm down, but how you interact. Like if you walk over and say, you got to stop that, it's not going to feel regulating, even though that might be how your heart's pumping, thinking you got to stop that. But it's like, if you have a little pivot about the idea that he's actually quite afraid, and like, how can I help him feel less afraid? Because they're all afraid. So like having ways to calm quickly, and part of that's relational.
So I missed that maybe the therapist was somebody that had met the child before, that maybe this wasn't a first session.
No, they're in the waiting room. It's a first meeting.
Oh, it's a first meeting. Oh gosh. So as a stranger going up, but I could see if you have Play-Doh, if you have a toy that I could see how that might distract and shift. So thank you.
Yeah. I mean, like we don't always have that, right? You could be in Costco and then it's much harder, right? You just want to get out of Costco. But I feel like just giving an example of kind of how to think. Thank you, Julie. So some tools. Stories are sometimes a great way for kids to talk about feelings. And Chandra Ghosh Ippen, who is a co-creator of the model child parent psychotherapy. She's written a ton of books. And once I was very scared is it basically takes the stress response and makes it like a kid's story with animals. So it's really accessible. And like it says something like, someone I love left. I don't like it when people leave. They leave a lot. People were fighting. I hid, but they kept fighting and they went on and on. People started yelling and no one wanted me around. I got scared and I sprayed and they yelled more and I sprayed more. And I don't remember what happened, but it was bad. And I worry bad things might happen again. Someone hurt me, but no one's ever going to hurt me again. I can bite and I can growl, So it goes through like those stress response things, but then it goes on to talk about tools. So music helps me calm down. And it has like a turtle and a bunny and a doggy, I still like to run, but I also found a safe place where I can be calm and snuggle. I talked to my mom, and she said she was very sorry that someone hurt me. This makes me feel much better. I will keep you safe and make sure no one ever hurts you again. So sometimes you want to help, but you don't know what to say or how to say it. And it's like kids' books about feelings like that one can be very helpful. Also, having calm down kits, things that you co-create with a child, that you either can keep in their room, in the living room, in your car, in your bag, wherever, depending on the situation, that provide regulation. So Play-Doh is easy, little jars. Glitter bottles are basically clear glue with food coloring and glitter, and you seal it and you shake it up and then you just watch the glitter fall, and it helps you to just settle because it's a visual. Sometimes manipulatives, things that people can twist, squeeze. The books. Some kids really like aromatherapy. Other kids couldn't be fazed by it. pinwheels, like blowing the breath when you can see the effect of your breath. Bubbles, really a good one, and they're inexpensive and easy to get. Hard chewing gum, that's a hit or miss because sometimes kids will swallow it. Um, TheraBands, like exercise bands, they come in different tensions. And for kids who are prone to being more aggressively angry, it's like a way to and you could keep that in your purse. So it's just simple. These are some ideas, but if you Google calm down kids, there are bazillion ideas. So I want to close us out with a loving kindness meditation. And the poem that I'm going to read is by a poet named Emily Dickinson, and it's called Hope. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chilliest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. So let's continue to turn our attention inward. I invite you to close your eyes if you feel comfortable to do that. If you prefer, find somewhere to gaze that feels comfortable, not too distracting. And for these last minutes, we're just going to be here with ourselves, taking some time to settle our nervous systems and to feel as we feel and be as we are. And just notice the sensation of your feet touching the floor. Notice what it feels like to be supported by your chair. And how does your back feel? Your hips? Just let your body settle downward. And exhale, settling into a more spacious presence. I invite you to offer yourself some soothing gesture as a way to bring kind, affectionate touch to yourself. I like a hand over my heart and another on my belly, but whatever works for you. Whatever you choose, just feel the warmth and pressure of your hands on your body and have the intention to offer yourself loving kindness and acceptance. I'm going to offer some loving kindness affirmations that I would like you to repeat in your mind with the intention to be kind to yourself. May I be safe from inner and outer harm. May I be compassionate of heart. May I have clarity of mind. May I be flexible, open, and kind. May I live with ease. We would all benefit from affection and kindness, so let us offer these affirmations to the group. May we be safe from inner and outer harm. May we be compassionate of heart. May we have clarity of mind. May we be flexible, open, and kind. May we live with ease. Let's close with 3 deep breaths. I invite you to offer yourself greater soothing by doing longer exhales. I'll count for us. Let's inhale and exhale. That's one. Let's inhale. And exhale. That's two. And last one. Let's inhale. And exhale. When you're ready, gently open your eyes and release this practice. Thank you so much for coming today. Do you have any questions or comments?
Hello, I have a question. I love your mindfulness exercises. Do you think you can share those with us so we can use them with the parents that we work with?
Sure.
This is Gerardo from Sharing Families Program, Center for Human Development.
Yeah, I can do that.
Will you? You already have my email, obviously, to for the when I register for this. Do you need my email, or I can put them on the chat, or if you want to send it to when I register, what would be your preference?
I can't see the chat in the way the presentation is, so I don't know, Jessica, if you could help me with that to know what his email is.
I believe we already have everyone that's signed up. We have all the emails, so we'll be sharing the slides afterwards.
Perfect.
Okay, but he's asking for the meditations.
Oh,
Can you say your name one more time?
This is Gerardo Barragan, Center for Human Development. I can give you my email.
Okay.
My
if you
email
want
is
to, if you want to put it in the chat, and I can give it to her.
okay. Cool. I'll put them on the chat.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
I think a lot of people are wanting the exercises, so we can send it out. We can send it out along with the slides if that's okay with you, Roxanne.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Any other thoughts or questions? I don't know, Jessica, if there's anything in the chat.
Everyone's very thankful and appreciative of your presentation.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
And
Well,
yes, sorry, the recording will be available as well, okay?
and I'll send you the slides as well.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming. I appreciate your participation and attendance, and I wish you well.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Take good care. Bye.